Well, good morning, and thank you, Drew. Thank you, Creative Mornings. Let's give yourselves a round of applause real quick. I mean, any group that first is using the commons. I love to see people in this space. And, because I remember just a few years ago, if you picture back to what this space was, it was like an ocean of surface parking lots and unused buildings. It was vacant in every sense of the word. There was not a constant inflow and outflow of people through the space. There wasn't a lot going on. And now, I mean, look at this. We've got Creative Mornings reading a manifesto at the beginning of a wonderful gathering. You know, any group that's reading a manifesto, I'm kind of digging. So I'm really honored to be here with all of you today. I figure, I'll take this thing out if that's all right. I figure what I'll do is just kind of tell you about, who I am and what inspires me about some of the work that we're doing, and then we'll open it up to any questions, with of course an overarching focus on wonder. So I did not grow up here. I grew up out on the East Coast. By the way, it's okay if you're not from here, I grew up just outside of Washington, D.C., and most of my family is from Queens, New York City. My parents were both professional modern ballet dancers, believe it or not. They danced for the Lubavitch Company in New York City, and then for the Netherlands Dance Theater in Holland. And what happened is, towards the end of my father's career, which at the time was like 27 years old, now they dance much longer, he hurt his back. And there was a chiropractor in Belgium that fixed him up. And he decided, you know what, I'm kind of at the end of my dance career anyway. I'm looking to find wonder and inspiration in other areas. So he decided to move back to the States, become a chiropractor. They both settled right outside of Washington, D.C., and then they started to treat a lot of the dance companies that came through the theaters and the Kennedy Center. And the way it would work is, my brother and I would get dragged to the performance, and then the party afterwards would be at our place. And so in terms of creativity, I may have not been all that creative myself, and to be totally honest with you, I had no interest at all in going to these ballet and modern dance performances. My brother and I were just annoyed the whole time, but we were surrounded by really wonderfully, extraordinarily creative people, like all the time. Weird people, interesting people, dancing and singing and booze and drugs and all sorts of crazy stuff. We didn't necessarily know any of that was going on, but we had a great time. And didn't have a lot of interests in the creative world until we were dragged to this performance of what was I believe it was the White Oak Dance Company. It was one of Baryshnikov's very last performances before he retired. Didn't want to go, not interested whatsoever, until Baryshnikov walked out on the stage. And I don't know if you've ever seen someone who is just like insanely charismatic, like an Oprah Winfrey or a Baryshnikov, but he walked out on the stage. And he just had this presence about him. He raised his hand, just a little flick of the wrist. And while my brother and I were not interested whatsoever up until this point, suddenly we leapt out of our seats. We were cheering like crazy. We thought it was the coolest thing ever, and we were kind of hooked. Now, I never got really into the dance world. I was very passionate about running. Literally distance running. And what I loved about running was that there was this direct correlation between hard work and success. If you work harder than the person who is standing next to you on the starting line, you're probably going to win. And that direct correlation between hard work and success also informs my kind of overarching philosophy in public service. I believe that everyone should have that correlation. Everyone, regardless of who you are, who your parents were, or what side of the tracks you grew up on, should have the opportunity to work really hard, to run with a great idea, to become an entrepreneur, and to live a brilliant life. And they should see the direct correlation in everything that they do. And so that's something that kind of informs everything that I try to work on in service. But, I guess I didn't really realize that I had any interest in service whatsoever then. I didn't know I wanted to be in government or politics, no interest. But I knew I wanted to run. And so I got a scholarship to attend the College of William and Mary to run. And then towards the end of college, I got a shoe contract with a shoe company to try to make the Olympics. And I moved to the Olympic Training Center, which at the time was just north of Detroit. And I started running professionally. And when you're running professionally, what happens is you're eating and you're running and you're sleeping, and there's not a whole lot of anything else. And the truth is, I just kind of got bored. If I wasn't wondering, I wasn't thinking creatively. There wasn't really any inspiration beyond putting one foot in front of the other, and that can get old after a little while. And so I started to get really into different social justice causes, and specifically working with a homeless population. At the time in Detroit, there was a fairly large homeless population. There still is. But I was finding that the people who I actually wanted to help, I couldn't because I didn't understand the law. That was kind of a barrier. And so I decided, you know what, I'm going to keep doing this running thing, but I'm going to move back to the East Coast. I'm going to enroll in law school. And then I'm going to continue running these races and marathons around the country to pay for living expenses. And so one of the marathons that I ran was the Twin Cities Marathon right here. As a matter of fact, the starting line at the time, I think the starting line has been moved slightly, but at the time it was right over here. And I remember vividly being in Minneapolis for the first time, looking around. It was right before a race, so at the time I really wasn't all that, I wasn't looking at like the urban design or where I'm going to move next or anything, but I was probably, using the restroom and getting ready for a really grueling effort. But right over here, I ran the race. I thought it was this incredible city, this beautiful kind of city in a park. You see the lakes, you see at least the initial portion of the downtown and riverfront, and I was just honestly really drawn to it. And I remember being at around the 15-mile mark or so. And it was just a competitive race, and we were crossing, I think it was probably Nokomis at the time, and turned to the guy next to me, and it was Scott DeFilippis, and he says to me, "Gosh, this is really an insanely cool city." And I didn't really respond to him, because I was racing, but I thought to myself, yeah, it really is pretty impressive. And so that was a qualifier at the time. It was the U.S. Championships, and it was a qualifier for the Pan American Games and to make Team USA. And I got the very last spot to compete for Team USA in Brazil and at the Pan American Games team. And so later that year, I was down in Brazil, getting ready to race for Team USA, and simultaneously I was trying to figure out like what the hell am I going to do with my life, and I was looking for jobs, and I was on the bus ride over to the training center. This is when Rio at the time they were planning to try to get the Olympics and try to get the World Cup, which they subsequently got. And so everything was like really vigorous in terms of security. And so they had these like armed guards at the front of the bus, and everything's very serious. And I sat next to this young woman on the bus who was also on Team USA. And I get talking to her, and she says, "Oh yeah, my father is this real estate attorney out in Minneapolis." And I thought to myself, well, first off, Minneapolis is super cool. Second off, what's your dad's number? I got her number too, but nothing ever came of that. And got her father's number. I got an interview out here in Minneapolis at what was then Faegre and Benson, now it's Faegre Baker Daniels, and I got a job. And I came out here for the summer. I had an absolute ball. I was inspired by what was happening here in the city. I was inspired by this sense of activism and engagement You know, right here in Minneapolis, everybody believes that they can make a difference. You know, there's this inherent belief that you can organize and you can work with a diverse group of people around a common cause, and if you do so, you can have an impact. Believe it or not, that's not the mentality everywhere. You know, growing up in DC, it's the perspective that unless your parents are some big-time lobbyist or a CEO or a congressperson, then you can't possibly have an influence on the way society functions. Here, you believe it, and believing it is kind of the first step. That's inspiration, that's wonder. If you don't have that first initial belief, you're never gonna see the world that you hope to create. And so, I mean, that is something special, and it's something, honestly, that we should take a whole lot of pride in here. And so, I got that job. I moved out here to start my life, worked as an attorney for a couple years there, and started to get heavily into different community causes. I represented an individual on death row down in Alabama, and I could talk extensively about that, but I'll save that perhaps for the questions. I did some work on following the tornado on the north side. And then moving into marriage equality, we did a little even more organizing. I started this race. It's called the Big Gay Race, and we had thousands and thousands of people rallying around a common and beautiful cause, which was love. And that work transitioned into a realization for me that, to find inspiration and wonder in my own life, I needed to feel and see and work with that inspiration and wonder in other people. And so I don't really know that I'm necessarily all that of a creative person, but I surround myself with beautifully creative people. I'm a goal-oriented, very kind of results-oriented person. Driven to, all right, here's what we want to do, how are we going to get there, let's figure out the strategy to make it happen. But the strategy to make it happen, if you do it right, is you're usually surrounding yourself with either young people or artists, young people and artists. Like every single movement, every coalition that you seek to build, every revolution that takes place throughout world history, it's got kind of those two people around you. You've got inspirational people, you got young people, you got artists. And, by the way, speaking of inspiration, so Sean Pierce right over here, she's my director of economic inclusion. Most of the ideas, the great ideas that I have are actually not my ideas at all. They come from working with a group of extraordinary people. So on the area specifically of economic inclusion, she's the one. The person standing next to him keeps me safe. He's maybe not all that creative, I don't think, but it may be creative in different respects. But he does keep me safe, in fact. So if all of you want to come up here and kick my butt, and I'm not giving that good of a speech, watch out. But I totally lost my train of thought right there. So, what was that? You're great. You're very creative, and you're wonderful. And so I got elected as mayor. I kind of skipped the whole campaign and all that stuff, but I'm happy to talk about that later. And so what we set out to have, like I said, a really kind of goal-oriented and data-driven philosophy. And that may not sound that creative or that exciting, but it's what works. If you want to see a tangible result at the end of the day, if you want to start, yes, with philosophy, if you want to start with a concept, but actually move towards quite simply helping people, which is, by the way, what government should be doing, you gotta be based on data. And so we kind of had 3 or so overarching things that we were going to focus on. The first big priority was affordable housing. The second, which we're doing a lot of focus on this year, is economic inclusion. And then the third, which is kind of a constant, is police community relations. So those are kind of the specific things that we're focused on. And in our work, you have to be constantly wondering. You have to be finding inspiration and creativity, because if not, you're doing things the same way that they've been done for 100 years. And you can't keep doing things the same way that they've been done for 100 years and expect different results. It's not going to happen. That's like the core of idiocy, is doing it the same way getting the same result and not changing anything. And I don't think it's a secret, but in the city, we do have issues that we need to correct. We do have historic injustices and institutionalized racism and a host of other issues that we need to tackle head on. And we need to make sure that the precision of our solutions match the precision of the harm that was initially inflicted. And that harm was precise. And so we've come up with a host of different ideas as to how not to like, often you use like the word help or uplift or subsidize or whatever. And the truth is that these communities, Black and Indigenous and communities of color and our immigrant populations, they're not looking for like a lift up. They've got phenomenal ideas already. A lot of it is about allowing and just getting out of the way so that they can run with these phenomenal ideas. I mean, these are not just like the artists and the entrepreneurs and the creative class and the CEOs of tomorrow. These are the artists and the entrepreneurs and the creative class and the CEOs of right now, of today. And you see that all around this city. So we've set up things like cultural districts that we're in the process of determining kind of the specific logistics of. But what it recognizes is that we need to be setting the canvas so that these communities can properly deliver the paint, that they can have their inspiration and their creativity make these places absolutely wonderful. And the truth is that they already are, but we can help invest in areas that have traditionally been disinvested. We can push back on these 100 years worth of intentional segregation and restrictive covenants that run with the land and intentional separation of communities from some of their most vital assets, like say by a highway or a whole lot of heavy industrial. These are changes that we can make. And so, I'll conclude and I'm going to open it up to like any, how long have I gone, by the way, right now? All right, perfect. All right, so I'm just going to conclude and then open it up to any questions by saying that, I've never really considered myself a very creative person. My parents were creative. My siblings were the creative one. My sister is an artist / marijuana tycoon out in California. My brother does all sorts of creative stuff down in Puerto Rico. I've always been like the not cool straight edge one kind of thing. But like I have around me people who are exceptional and who are creative, and I seek inspiration from them and from the communities that I work with, and that's ultimately how I think we can see progress in our city. So thank you so much. This is really cool. I don't get to give just these kind of off the cuff speeches very often. So it's fun to be out here. Thank you for just participating in community, and I'll open it up to any questions that you might have. Thank you.
So that's scary. So I work in the nonprofit industry. I work for NAMI, Minnesota, and one of the things that we do in the nonprofit industry that I really enjoy is we do a lot of information sharing. We have conferences, we have message boards, and we share a lot of best practices. Do cities do that? Do mayors talk that way? Do you share those creative ideas and inspiration?
So what was your name? Amy. First, thank you for the work that you're doing. It's kind of cool. In Minnesota, we've got one of the most vibrant, active nonprofit communities anywhere in the country, and I shouldn't even be saying one of the most by a long shot. And so, thank you for your work. And so the answer is yes, absolutely. I'm not of the assumption that what we're pushing is necessarily the best or the only way of doing things. And so the best way you want to do is you want to consult with other mayors and other individuals throughout the country. And cities right now are really at the forefront. We've got this dynamic where you've got gridlock at times at the state and federal legislature. You've got this presidency that I won't even get into. You have people that are also moving back to cities at massive rates. And with that, you have municipalities and cities in particular that are really becoming this beautiful laboratory of democracy, where you could try things out, maybe screw up at times, but also get things really, really right. And you also, in cities, you don't have that traditional like left-right spectrum. In Minneapolis, for instance, we're a city of entirely Democrats or left of that, but you don't, I mean, there's no Democrat or Republican way to pick up the trash or to plow the streets, or to put up a beautiful park. There's no Democratic or Republican way, shouldn't be anyway, of pushing back on some of the intentional segregationist policies that we've had for 100 years. That shouldn't be ideologically driven. That should be morals and just doing what's right. And so you've got different perspectives that everybody can bring to the table. And so, but I'm going to finally get to your answer to your question, which is yes. So we have a series of conferences and sharing opportunities that are like U.S. Conference of Mayors is one, the League of Cities. And so I head out and I work and consult with mayors throughout the country and talk to them. Yesterday I had a conversation with Mayor de Blasio from New York City. The day before that it was someone else, and it's helpful because it's not only seeing what other cities are doing well, it's also seeing where cities have screwed up in the past. And I believe, are very honest about that. There are mistakes that I'm sure I've made. There are things that we were doing really well in terms of a forward-thinking vision. And yes, it helps a whole lot to share, and you get a whole lot out of it. So the answer is absolutely. Other question?
Any other questions? You could probably also give the mayor a high five if you come up here.
I welcome it.
Are you up to that?
Yeah, bring it on.
Heather?
All right.
When are you announcing your presidential run?
Yeah, right. It's funny. During the campaign, the jab that I would always get was, he's too young, too ambitious, not from here. Those were kind of the three things. Too young, too ambitious, not from here. And I was like, first of all, yeah, I'm not from here, but I think not being from here and getting some different perspectives and having lived in different cities is actually like kind of a good thing. Secondly, I think some ambition is a good thing. I mean, you want people to be ambitious at the very least on behalf of the city. And the third, I'm 37 years old right now, and there's a guy that's running for president who's 37 years old and is a mayor of a city that is 1/4 the size of mine, and so maybe I'm not being ambitious enough. But no, I'm not running for president.
Anybody else? Come on up.
Yeah. You gotta give me a high five, though. There you go.
I just want to say I loved every single thing you said. I love everything about you. My name is Catherine. But I also, one tiny thing is surrounding yourself with young people and creative people. What about old people?
No, you're right. Yeah, you're right.
I mean, there is a whole group of us who is ready to get busy and ready to do whatever you need done. So don't forget about us.
No, you're so absolutely right. And the Venn diagram of creative people, without a doubt, includes seniors, and old people includes everybody. You know what I mean? And so, I mean, I'm a person that likes to kind of get different perspectives, and regardless of what socioeconomic background or age demographic it comes from, like, yes, these are perspectives that are needed at the table, and when you look at kind of the round table that I have in terms of consultation, yeah, it includes young people, but it includes, I mean, some of my biggest advisors are over 90 right now, and have been extremely helpful, not just in kind of like a political career, but also in the sense of like, here's some things that we've tried that are, I mean, one of my favorite things is to suggest something and to say, yeah, we tried that like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, and it just didn't work. It's a horrible idea. Here's the 5 reasons why. Well, okay, all right, that's a pitfall that I can avoid. I won't need to do that. And so, yes, you're absolutely right.
Hi, I'm Melissa, And I'm a young person. I'm a creative. I left my corporate job a couple of years ago to pursue freelance and entrepreneurship full time. And the dreaded Economist article that came out a couple years ago, that's saying Minneapolis is one of the most expensive cities to live in, and all my friends were like, that's not true. Friends in other cities were like, that's obviously a lie. And it's like, no, if you look at the ratio, it's like very accurate, and I see it firsthand in my life. And I'm kind of at this interesting bridge in my life where I'm like, yeah, I'm feeling the effects of this, and I guess I'm curious what your takes are on the temperature of Minneapolis and rising rent prices and everything that's going on in the city. And as a young entrepreneur, I have a very real issue to pursue my passion, my dreams, to keep going, or to go back to the private sector, to go back to a corporate job that I frankly hated, with rising rent prices and whatnot. So I'm curious, or maybe just words of advice, inspiration to keep going. I don't know.
First time. Let's give her some inspiration to keep going. How about keep going. We had a, this is kind of the never-ending cycle of an economy where you have artists that uplift a community, values go up, rents go through the roof, and then they get displaced from some of the communities that they've made wonderful to begin with. And now, by the way, that's not just artists, that's also communities of color. Same thing happens there. And it happens again and again and again. And right now in Minneapolis, we have a whole lot of people that want to live here. We have people that are desperate to live in and around a downtown core. And when you have demand to live in a city that is sky high, which by the way we're really proud of, it means we're doing a good job in terms of the city, but you don't have the supply of housing or affordable housing to accommodate, prices get jacked up, rents go through the roof, and people are forced out. Now, we as government, I'm a strong believer, have a role to play in that. Big role. And so this will touch directly on affordable housing, which is my like number one priority. This is like one of the reasons that I got into politics to begin with, and I care so deeply about this issue. And so you got to attack it. You got to attack it though from kind of two different prongs. The first is subsidy. And I'm going to get a little technical here, but creative people can also be very technical people. So you'll follow right along. The first piece is subsidy. You need someone to bridge the gap between whatever constitutes the market rate and the affordable rate. Not to mention, you need that deeply affordable housing so that people who are experiencing homelessness have that next rung on the ladder to pull themselves out. Right now, that rung doesn't exist. Doesn't exist. And because of that, we collectively are perpetually keeping people as homeless. And that's wrong. First of all, I believe that housing is a right. Everyone should have the ability to go home at the end of the night, to rest their head on the pillow, and to rejuvenate for the next day. But not only is this wrong to kick out that rung on the ladder, but it's also financially really dumb because it costs about 3 times as much to keep a person homeless on the streets, cycling through poverty and shelters and hospitals and sometimes jail, than it does just to get them to home. 3 times as much. So this just makes sense. It makes financial sense. It makes moral sense to help provide people with stable housing and affordability. And so first, we're investing heavily. About 3 times the previous record, we're now investing in affordable housing to the tune of $40 million. And we're picking up the slack where other levels of government have dropped off, or at least are not doing. We used to get huge funding back in the early 80s from the federal government to do public housing and to do affordable housing, and a lot of that has dried up. And I'd like to be able to say, well, it's all with this administration, but the truth is it's not. It's been happening over 35 years. And we need to put the pressure on all electeds, all politicians, to say, you know what, this matters. People should have the right to live in a great city, and we need to put our money where our mouth is. But it's not just that. The other part of it is simple supply and demand economics. And I know I'll be like, I don't want to talk about that, but this is the truth. When you have demand that's sky high and you don't have the supply to accommodate it, the prices will continuously go up no matter what you do on the subsidy side. And so I'm a big believer in diverse neighborhoods. This is kind of core to what I believe in. I'm a believer that when you have 1,000 different ideas and mentalities and backgrounds at the table, in the same neighborhood, on the same block, in the same building, that's when great ideas take shape. That's when entrepreneurship gets triggered. That's when our city is really going to rock. But to have those ideas at the table, you need to allow for a diversity of housing choice in every neighborhood. Housing options in every neighborhood. And our city has been set up, a little historic piece right here. So we have maps at the city. We have maps, prescriptive maps, that quite literally designate North Minneapolis as a slum for blacks and Jews. And eventually, then we had restrictive covenants that ran with the land that says you can't sell to a black person or you can't sell to a Jewish person. And eventually that became illegal. We had the Civil Rights Act that passed, and you could no longer explicitly be racist. But then we started to do the same things implicitly through our zoning code. And cities around the country did this. And we've set it up so that unless you can own a really big home on a really big parcel, you can't live in huge swaths of the city. And I'm sure many of you even here have experienced this. I'm not poor. I'm the mayor of Minneapolis, and my wife is way more successful than I am. But, we still can't live in huge swaths of the city because of affordability and how it's set up, And that's not okay. And the way we've done that is we've zoned huge swaths exclusively for single-family zoning. So again, have a really big parcel, you got to put a really big house on that. If you can't do that, can't live there. And it's set it up so that implicitly in the end impact is segregation, really serious segregation. And so we have become the first city in the country to eliminate single-family exclusive zoning. So you can still have a single-family home. But in addition to being able to have a mansion on a really big parcel, you could also perhaps have a duplex or a triplex. You are able to build affordability into communities that have traditionally not had any of it. And we should have affordable housing in every single neighborhood of the city. Everybody benefits when you've got a diversity of perspective and background and socioeconomic class or whatever in the same neighborhood. Right now we don't have that, but we're going to be the first city in the country to hopefully fix that. And that's a big change, and sometimes the only thing that people hate worse than the status quo is any change at all. But it's a change that's necessary, and it's a change that we really should be leaning into. I believe in it, and I'm telling you, there's people that were pretty pissed off about this decision, by the way, You might have seen red lawn signs all around portions of the city, it was, I believe so strongly that 5 and 10 and 15 years down the road, there will be other cities and states throughout the country that will have adopted exactly what we did because it works. Simply, it works and it helps people.
Mayor Frey, you need to go to a meeting. All right. Thank you so much. Let's give him a round of applause.
Thank you, everyone. Keep doing what you're doing. This is super cool. Appreciate it.